Hi, I'm Lady Harper, and this is Harper's Handcrafted Projects. Today, we are going to be making a super fun outside game for whenever the weather decides to be a little bit warmer, or you could do it inside, so you don't even have to wait. But you might remember from your youth, or maybe last weekend, I don't know when the last time you played, little pieces of wood that you would stack up and then pull them out and then put them back on top. And then as it grew, it got wobbly, and then whenever Lainey's turn came, it would fall over. Let's make a giant version of Jenga. Giant Jenga! I'm so excited. My friend Lexi is getting married, and at a reception she wanted a set, and I was lucky enough to have received a set from my brother for Christmas a couple years ago, so we're going to use it as a template to get started. It's really just cut down 2x4s. It's not very involved. So the material list is exactly that. It is 5 8-foot lengths of 2x4s. I used studs because they're a little bit softer and I just like how they look better. And sandpaper. When it comes to the tools, it's a couple extra. You could, if you were so inclined, do this just with a circular saw. So if that's what you got and you really want to make this, then you can use a circular saw. I do not recommend it. It will take you a really long time and you might want to pull your hair out at the end, but you'll be a pro at the circular saw by the end of it. Instead, today we are going to be using a table saw to rip all of them to the right width, which is 2.5 inches. And then we're going to use a chop saw and a fun stop block method to chop them all down to 7 3/4 inches long. So, and we're going to do all of that without measuring because we have a template, right? So we're going to do all of that, all of the chopping, the 54 pieces of Jenga, with a chop saw without measuring anything. Game on. Giant Jenga! First things first, I've set up my table saw with an outfeed table, which is just a piece of plywood on some sawhorses and some plywood stacked up to where it's level. So when it comes off of the saw, it doesn't bow up and pop off of the blade at all like this, and just so it's sturdy. Last thing you want to do is mess around with saws and blades. So we have raised the blade to where it just clears the piece of wood. That's all you need, just so it goes through. Nothing too fancy. And then what we want to do is we're just going to take off about 1/4 inch. So because these are stud boards, they're meant to be inside walls. They're not meant to be finished pieces of furniture or any sort of games that you look at, like our Jenga. So we're just going to make sure that this piece of wood is square before we start chopping it down to size. So you could just use one side, but then you might get fray marks or chips or checks in the wood, and you don't want to make sure, you want to make sure that you have a nice hard line to start measuring from. So what we're going to do is take about 1/4 inch off of this side, and then we're going to measure the full 2.5 inch width for the board. So what we're going to do is set the saw fence to about 1/4 inch. So right here on the saw, there's so this lines up with the blade, and this shows you how much you're taking off. So when you're taking this stuff off, you have to also account for the width of the blade, so you know that you're taking off about 1/4 inch. So let's go down to 1/4 inch right here. And then we're gonna lock it in place. And then we're ready to go. So we're gonna get ear protection and eye protection and then get this puppy started. Something that's really important about this is to go slow. It's not a race, it's not important, and just make sure you take your time to let the machine do its work as opposed to forcing it through. So just guide it, but don't make it. Now we have a nice clean edge, so we know that this is a good place to start. So we're gonna do the rest of them. We have 5 boards that are all completely cut on one side, and they're nice and flat. So we know that that is a nice straight surface. When we were putting this through, one other tip I have is to make sure that as you put it through that you keep the board up next to the fence so it doesn't wander out. It can jam up the blade, it can give you a raggedy looking cut. So just be, as you're guiding it through, be mindful of keeping it up against the fence. That's what it's here for, is to be your guide. So what I've done is I've taken the fence and I've moved it over to 2.5 inches. Since I want the final width to be 2.5 inches, I took my tape measure and I wanted to make sure that from the inside of the blade, so whatever the cut takes, to the fence where I know my straight edge is gonna ride is gonna be 2.5 inches. So that shows 2.5 inches, perfect. And honestly, a little off, it'll be fine. But, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take those 5 boards and we're gonna cut them all the way down on the other side. So we'll keep this side against the fence because it's flat, and then we're going to cut off from the other side, and so we know we'll have 2 flat sides. So we've got our piece of wood, we've got one of the sides done. We're going to stick it through here. I did this once before without it, but I'm going to use this as a push block, so at the end I can push it all the way through without getting my fingers near the blade, because nobody wants to lose their digits. I mean, you might, but I don't. So use a push block, because if it's gonna cut something, please let it cut the wood and not your fingers. So anything will work. I'm gonna use this piece, but it really doesn't matter until we get closer to here. So we're gonna cut this piece down and see what it looks like. Alright, so got one down to length or width. Now we'll get after the rest of them. What we're gonna do next is sand these. I'm gonna do 150 grit. It's pretty smooth already. If it were rougher, I'd probably start with that with a lower grit. We're gonna do 150 and then 220, so these are really nice and soft to the touch. We're also gonna chamfer the edges, which means putting a little bit of an angle on the corners, about like this, and we can do that with a sander, no problem. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just so you don't catch the edges with this whenever it falls or whatever. So we're gonna get started on sanding. I've gotten out my chop saw. It's the chop saw because it goes chop, chop, chop. We've got to cut down 54 pieces of wood. So this is our sample block that we used from the set from my brother. And basically we want it to be 7 3/4 inches. One easy way to do this, what you could you could measure out every single board and be like, okay, well here's 7 3/4. So what I did was I clamped a piece of spare wood. This is another good reason to keep stuff around. I will keep telling you to keep all of your little souvenirs from other projects so you can use it. So this is just a cut in, I think this is probably an old pallet that I kept the corner of it. So this is the piece of wood that, let's just say that we have the entire thing, and if I bring this down, I butt this up to the blade and then clamp down this piece of wood to where as I feed in the big piece of wood, chop it off, it's only gonna be this length. So everything is gonna be the exact same size. Ta-da! No more measuring. So no fractions, no measuring, no anything like that, just a whole bunch of the same piece 54 times. So I'm gonna get started because it's gonna take a little while. Eye protection, ear protection, face protection. Just like with the table saw, you wanna make sure that this is all the way up against the back part or the fence. It's super easy. Super easy to do. Everything's solid. This is pretty heavy. I have another outfeed piece over here that supports the far end of the 8-foot piece of wood. So we're just gonna knock these out. Ready? All right, we have 54 pieces of Giant Jenga, and now what we're gonna do is, so let's just talk about taking your time. So I'm not a very patient person, never claimed to be, but certainly not. And when you take your time and let the saw blade do what it does, you get little to no tear out, making everything a lot easier to do. Now, when you are trying to just get it done quickly, you have a lot of tear out, which means that now I have to go back and really, well, first, not give myself a splinter, and second, fix all of these things that I have done hastily. So it does, you're saving time in the cutting by going quickly, but in the end, sanding, redoing all of this stuff, you're not really saving that much time. So just know that it comes at a cost. Boo. So most of these I was hasty on, so there will be a lot of sanding. But we're really close, and I'm very excited. We are done, and we are going to play Jenga. You ready?
Are you ready?
Are you ready to lose?
Oh, don't do that!
It works.
Called it.
So I lost, and that was not fun, but Jenga works. It looks good. It feels good. I didn't poke myself, which is just an absolute blessing. And I think it turned out really well. I did it in about an afternoon, and definitely a doable thing in a day. So don't be afraid to get this one started. Make sure to subscribe, there we go, like, or follow me on the Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Harpers Handcrafted. We'll see you next time. Later, taters.